It was only about a little over a year after I had left the CIA, still living in Mexico City, that I began to put ideas down on paper for a book. I thought that by describing what I had done in the CIA, demonstrating the methodology of the CIA, how it operates in other countries, I could make a contribution to the peace movement in the United States, because I could show that it wasn't just in Vietnam that these things were happening. It was happening in Latin America and many other countries around the world, except at a lower level of intensity. It didn't involve all the bombing and the bloodshed that was going on in Vietnam, but the other types of intervention and the promotion of repression were very similar in principle to what was happening in Vietnam. And the other reason I wanted to write a book was that I felt that I could make a contribution to those people who were victimized by the CIA's activities by helping them to defend themselves better, that is, by exposing the methodology so that they could have a more effective defense against it. And of course, as I began to write the book and began to research the book, I spent 6 months in Cuba during this period. Well, I went back to Paris, had lots of problems from the CIA there because by that time they were on to the fact that I was writing the book. But anyway, it took much longer than I had expected. Instead of always thinking I was 2 or 3 months away, it ran to 4.5 years in writing. And finally, 5 years after I actually started to write the book, it was published, which was in January of this year. Now it's been published in the United States and is circulating well, and it's going to come out in a lot of other languages. Needless to say, the CIA hasn't liked it, and they haven't liked a lot of the other things that I've been doing to expose their operations and people, working with a lot of different organizations, both from within the United States, other Americans who are just as concerned as I am about this type of activity, and organizations of people in other countries. There are a couple of things that I'd like to say just as a matter of principle. These are the main ideas that I could put across, I think. And then nobody's asking any questions. I'll just stop and ask for questions then. First, the CIA, one thing, the CIA is not an invisible government. It isn't an organization that's gotten out of control. The CIA has done certain things, and we've been reading about them lately, that were not known to the president or may have been indeed against his orders. But the CIA, by and large, for 25, going on 30 years now, has been an instrument of the president and of the National Security Council. There has been an artificial separation, which has allowed the president, in certain cases, to deny certain things. But that's only artificial. The CIA is an instrument of the president. That is a very important thing to remember. Now, another thing that's very important to remember is that the CIA is not all-powerful and all-knowing. It is a human organization which has human failings, and it can be defeated. The events in Cuba, the survival of the Cuban Revolution, the defeat of interventionist forces in Vietnam, the publication of the Marchetti book, of my book, other investigations and the revelations that are going on right now, which has got the CIA reeling on the defensive and morale way down, are all evidence that this organization, for however sinister it may be, can still be defeated. And there is a tendency sometimes for people to be paranoid about the CIA and think that they're all over the place and quite effective. It's quite the contrary. They have had a terribly effective effect in many countries, but they can be defeated, and it is worth the struggle against them. Now, there is one last thought that I would like to leave, and that is this, that I finally, as I went through writing this book, went through a political radicalization of my own in the process, I finally concluded that, it was obvious. The real issue isn't with the CIA. The CIA is an instrument. It is a huge bureaucracy. It has certain tools, and it has certain weapons. It is supposed to do certain things, but it is a tool or instrument used by the people in the government who are formulating American foreign policy and by those other people outside the government who are also bringing to bear great influence on American foreign policy. And by these I mean the handful of people who are the owners and the managers of the American-based multinational corporations. This is what the CIA is serving. I finally concluded that I had really joined a secret political police which was serving the interests of American companies. This wasn't the version that I had been taught at the beginning. It was something I concluded at the end, and it is, of course, one of the major points that have to be made, I think, in any discussion of the CIA, that the real issue isn't the CIA. The real issue is economic exploitation by rich and powerful people of keeping poor people poor. This is what is underneath the need and the necessity for having a CIA. Okay, I think that is enough for me by way of monologue. Why not ask some questions then?
nothing wrong with what you're saying, except that it's very, very heavily out of date. What's going on now in what the CIA has been doing is to actually Watergate itself, to actually destroy its own credibility as the last generation of CIA agents and bring in a new gang. We have seen this before in 1967 when most of the material that you've given us was put out then, when the CIA decided to throw over the side all of the old 1950s worn-out AFL-CIO trade union hacks who had been funneling money into reactionary trade unions in Europe and elsewhere.
Not so. Let me tell you that Irving Brown, who was one of the originals working in CIA trade union operations, was just in Portugal last year working to try to help right-wing Portuguese establish an affiliate of the ICFTU.
Yeah, we're aware of that. We're aware that
they haven't set aside those people.
Yeah, we know that they haven't set aside those people. They're still funneling money to Mario Suarez through Willy Brandt and Olaf Palme. We know all that. We also know, however, that they've gone on for more than that. They created in the late 1960s a phony left, as you pointed out, they'd done in Uruguay. They created in the late 60s a phony left in the United States and elsewhere, which was going to expose that last generation, who are all pretty well known to anybody who cares to know about that now, and who would thereby gain the credibility to become the new left. And a lot of them actually ended up doing precisely that. They became the new left in the United States, which was going to expose all the National Student Association and all the other worn-out organizations from the 50s. Now, what we're up against now is, as has been said by Ron Dellums last week when you were on that television hookup in San Francisco, there is no such thing as an ex-CIA agent. Ex-CIA agents only serve to bring in the new generation of new CIA agents who are a newfangled model to react to the new situation on the left.
Yeah, I think you all know where this guy is from. I think he's from the NCLC in the United States or Canada.
You're absolutely right. We're from the NCLC in the United States.
All over Canada, I know. Why don't you sit down and let these other people answer some questions?
No, because that is exactly the issue that we're facing now. When we have an agent who has decided to an agent,
this guy,
fine. Yeah, I'll give plenty of opportunity.
This fellow serves an organization which is financed by the Rockefellers. And
that's the actual CIA lie. That is the actual CIA lie that you have been putting out. It's exactly the same kind of lie as the rest of them.
They are provocators and infiltrators, and they're no damn good.
We have been exposing the Rockefeller agencies from the beginning, which you came to rather belatedly because of the pressure we built up. Even the Wall Street Journal thought that CIA story was too corny to print last week. Now, anybody who wants to know what an agent is can look at a political program. It's an excellent idea. The way to figure out whether somebody is a police agent or not is not did he do this, did he do that, is to look at a political program and to figure out on the basis of who's putting together a program for reorganizing a socialist economy now.
The NCLC is a provocative organization that tries to...
You're damn right we're provocative. We're very, very provocative against CIA agents like you who are trying to come out in the new cover. That's absolutely right.
You are working on the other side, trying to pass yourself off as left. Okay, any other questions? Here's one over here.
Yeah, I have a statement perhaps to make and a question. I am very glad that you finally realized that what you were doing in the CIA. I think perhaps when you were serving in the CIA, you were committing a crime against humanity. I find it, the thing I'm sorry about and sad is for the people of Uruguay right now. I wonder perhaps if what you did there today is irreparable.
Well, if you feel that way, then I think you're wrong, because everything that the CIA does is a stopgap measure. It is working around the world trying to plug up holes in the political dam, but it's a short-run measure every time. The people will continue to organize themselves and effect finally change. Sure, the CIA is a very important and dangerous counter-revolutionary force, but the Uruguayans will eventually be able to settle their own affairs for themselves, just like Iranians will be able to, just like Brazilians and Chileans and people in other countries where the CIA has installed what is obviously a temporary repressive regime. Take Vietnam, for example. There the CIA was working from the middle 1950s in the more secret way that I was operating in Latin America, and it was the failure of CIA's operations in the 1950s which required the overt and massive military intervention in the 1960s. But the Vietnamese defeated the CIA, not just the CIA, but all of the military force of the United States government. Likewise, the Greeks. The CIA had something to do with that military junta in Greece. That lasted for, what, 7 years and was finally overthrown. The Greeks recovered. So will the Uruguayans and so will the other people in these other countries. I'm sure of that.
Well, what I'm saying is they will perhaps one day recover. The problem is that they have already gone through a lot of punishment, you know, which I think is very, very sad.
Yes, I do too. That's why I'm trying to make it as difficult as possible for them to continue to do it. Whatever I can contribute to the other side now, I'm doing.
Yeah. Okay. My question: how do you see the future role of the CIA in today's political structure, or perhaps better put in international organizations?
I see the CIA right now, as I said before, as an instrument of wider interests. Now, what is going to happen with the result of these revelations in the congressional hearings and the Rockefeller Commission report and all of that? I think what's going to happen is that they will apply some cosmetic reforms. They will, for example, establish an oversight committee to control the CIA. They will let Colby resign with some dignity and appoint a new director from outside the CIA. And for the foreseeable future, probably the director of the CIA will come from outside the agency. They will tell the CIA not to manufacture poisons or to go around assassinating foreign leaders. They'll try to make it appear as if all of these things that happened in the past were abuses and that these abuses have now been corrected. This is what they'll try to do. But the fact is the CIA has been going along, as I mentioned, I think in Portugal, operating at full steam all along. You see, I think the CIA, putting it in the political perspective, is a necessity because of that portion of prosperity, of material economic prosperity in the United States, which is founded and based on the operations of the multinational corporations abroad. Now, the CIA serves their interests by working all the time, and this is what I was doing right and left, to try to promote the optimum operating conditions of for those companies abroad. And this is why the CIA really is a necessity, because until the definition of the national security interest in the United States change, there's going to be a CIA acting as it always has in the past. Until the system itself changes, its instruments of security are not going to change. That's the problem, you see. It's not the CIA, it's the other part.
But do you see the system changing?
Do I see it changing?
Yeah.
Well, yes, I see certain signs which are very positive in the United States and other countries too. It's far from me to be able to predict just how things are going to develop in the next, say, 50 or 100 years there, but certainly in the United States there's great disaffection from the corporate system, and nobody believes what the government says anymore. There is a crisis of legitimacy which is coming on. Just how fast it's going to come on and how effective, I don't know. Yes, over here.
Yes, in your interview in Playboy, you stated that the CIA was effective in harassing war resistors in London. I was curious to find out how effective are they in Canada doing that sort of thing?
Effective in what?
Are they after war resistors that are in Canada? Do they infiltrate organizations?
I don't really know. They might, yes. I don't know. It might be FBI would have a greater interest in the war resistors here than the CIA. Mm-hmm. Maybe both would. I just don't know. Certainly there is a CIA office here in the U.S. Embassy in Ottawa. Probably there are CIA bases or offices, smaller ones, in the consulate in Toronto and probably the consulate here, since there is a Cuban mission here. Yeah, the CIA often will try to set up its offices wherever the Soviets, the Cubans, or the Czechs, or others go. But I don't really know. I can't tell you about that war resistor thing. I would think they would have interest in it, but I think the FBI and the military intelligence services also would be interested in the resistors here. Yes?
Mr. Agee, I think that there is no doubt that your book is a valid contribution to exposing government agencies, to exposing torture, repression, et cetera, and all sorts of things. Speak up! I said, I think your book is a valid contribution to exposing the kind of torture, terror, and repression that goes on in the world and is funded and supported by agencies like the CIA. However, there's one thing that puzzles me, and that is, since you are giving this valuable information out, you're doing it today, you're doing it extensively in other places, why is it the CIA has not harassed you? It has certainly eliminated others for doing much less than you are doing.
Yeah, that's a very common question. I get it every place I go. And I don't have a full answer to it because I don't know, of course, what's going on in their minds. But certain things have happened. And I'll tell you two stories about what has happened. When I started the book, I tried to keep it as secret as possible. I didn't tell people I was working on it because in Mexico, one word by the CIA to the Mexican government, the CIA chief and the president of Mexico at that time were on intimate working relationships or terms. One word by the CIA to the Mexican government, and I would have been out of the country in hours, or maybe worse. I didn't want them to know I was writing the book, and finally, in fact, they didn't even know it until later on in Paris. I had made a mistake when I was in Cuba. I wrote a letter to Marcha, which is the principal political journal in Uruguay. At that time, in November of 1971, there was an electoral campaign going on in that country. The left had formed a coalition similar to the Popular Unity Coalition, which had elected Allende in Chile the year before. I wrote this letter saying who I was, saying that I was writing a book, and in the letter I described some of the ways that the CIA has intervened or intervenes in electoral operations in order to support the traditional political parties. And I suggested in the letter that they might be doing that at that very moment in Uruguay. Well, I finished my work in Cuba, and I sent that letter along, finished my work in Cuba, went back to Paris, and between Christmas and New Year's of 1971, I had a knock at the door in this little old seedy hotel where I was staying in the Latin Quarter. I opened the door, and there standing in front of me is Keith Gardner, who was one of the people with whom I had gone through the Air Force part of the CIA training program with years before, and whom I had known through the years. I knew something was up right then and there, and eventually he pulled this piece of paper out of his pocket. It was a Xerox copy of my letter, which I hadn't even known yet had been published in Marcha. And he said, look, Helms wants to know what this is all about. Helms being Dick Helms, who was then the head of the CIA. I thought right then and there I'd better bluff because I wanted them to think that no matter what they might do against me, they wouldn't be able to stop the book. So I was still really practically at the beginning. What I'd done in Mexico and what I'd done in Cuba had really been only preparatory work. So I told him that I had written about 850 pages. I'd finished the book, in fact, and I was working with my editor, Francois Maspereau, to get it down to a publishable length. And I told him, of course, that Maspereau had copies and that they were all around. So I didn't want them to think that there was any way they could do something to me and stop the book or get all the copies. This bluff apparently it worked to a certain extent, and I refused to see him the next day, although he wanted me to. He admitted, in fact, that they had located me in this hotel through the Paris police, with whom they also worked very closely. Nothing happened for a few more months when I met a young American journalist whose name was Sal, and he was supposedly an underground or alternative journalist who had worked in the movement in the United States and then had gone over to Paris sometime in late 1971. This is about March or April of '72. Sal befriended me, and in May, a combination of things occurred which were very black. One, my money ran out with Maspereau, and I didn't have any more money. He wouldn't give me more money because he wasn't satisfied with the progress I was making. He didn't appreciate really the problems in getting all the material to reconstruct the events, the research material. So I was running out of money. I started to get surveillance in the streets in Paris, teams of people following me around. When that first happened, I worried, of course, and that very night I took all my stuff and checked out of the hotel and went off to Catherine's room as a friend who was an artist and had a little small room that she used as a studio, too, in another section of Paris. So I went off to live with her, but I kept on seeing Sal because he had done an interview with me, and we were going to try to get money. He was going to sell the interview and get it published, and we would split the fee. And that way I would have a little more money to keep me going, because by this time I had learned about the British Museum newspaper library, which is a fabulous place, and they had all the newspapers of the very dates in which I was looking for the events. So my plan was to finish everything I could in Paris, go over to London, and finish the book. So I was getting this surveillance. I went off and lived in this secret place, wouldn't tell Sal or anybody else where it was. It's a very long story, but a girl came into the picture. One night, Sal was invited me out to dinner since I had no more money. And after dinner, he said, let's stop off at this bar. So we went to this English-style pub in the Latin Quarter there, and we sat down, and he sat on one stool, I sat here, and these two were empty, and then there's somebody else down along the line. A girl came in not 3 minutes after I had sat down, carrying a Time magazine practically as a flag, and her name was Leslie, and we began to talk, and she said that her principal interest was Latin American politics. I asked her a few questions, and she didn't know one thing about it. She claimed to be a Venezuelan heiress, but of American parentage. What a story. But anyway, I didn't think too much about it. It's kind of suspicious, but I took her name and address anyway, and that was a mistake. A few days later, about a week later, Sal asked me, he said, say, did you call that girl the other night? And I said, no, Sal, I didn't call her, and I really hadn't. I said, here, you take the name and address. She really isn't my type. You call her and see her. And so Sal said, no, you see her. You talk to her, because you know she's got a lot of money, and maybe she would help you, give you some money. So I said, well, Sal, that's an idea. And I called her and went over to see her and saw her a couple of times and finally told her who I was and what I was doing, and she decided right then and there to become a patron of the arts and finance me in this book to a point. She gave me money, and I really needed it, because what had happened was that I had rented a typewriter in Paris, and my money had ran out, and Catherine does a comic strip, and it was only published 6 months of the year, and this was the off 6 months, so she didn't have any money coming in either, not even for food. So I had to turn my rented typewriter back in to get the deposit back. I had done that, and Sal, about that time, had said, say, I've got this French friend who has gone off to London for a few days, but he is going to be away for a while, and you can use his typewriter. He left it with me. So Sal gave me his typewriter to use, this other person's typewriter, said I'd have to give it back right on a minute's notice, though, when the guy came back, because he didn't want this person to know that he'd lent it to a third party without permission. So I took this typewriter back to Catherine, who was using it all the summer of 1972. And I was getting this surveillance, though, the people following me, and I was always able to shake it off going up and down the metro and through parks and things, and it was strange that I would get these people following me after my meetings with Sal and Leslie. So the first week of October, I had a meeting with them, and Sal didn't show up. It was a very rainy day, and Leslie had this terrible flu. She comes rushing in with this old used typewriter, and she said, boy, she said, the guy has just arrived at Sal's place. She was by this time supposedly living with Sal, and she said, the guy has come for the typewriter, and he's really angry. She said, but in spite of the rain and my terrible flu, I went out to the used typewriter shop up the street and bought you this one. So she said, here, you'll have this typewriter, and you won't be without a typewriter. So I took that typewriter from her. Instead of taking it back to the secret place where I was living, I took it over and left it at Therese Place. That was a room where another friend lived. It was right near where it was right near where Sal and Leslie lived, in the cafe where we all used to go, and Therese never locked her room. And so I was able to take the typewriter in, the new one, the used one, leave it there, go through my usual routine, go back and get the first typewriter, bring it back, and 2 hours later I gave it to Sal. That was more or less the end of it until about 2 days later. Leslie's taking us to lunch, and she says, say, Phil, how do you like that typewriter I bought you the other day? And I said, well, Leslie, you know, I'm about to go over to London only another week now, and I don't need it because, as you know, I'm making these tapes of all of these different episodes. And I was taping a lot of episodes which I was going to hide in Paris, so that if anything happened to me when I went over to London or on the trip or anything, I would be able to, somebody else could finish writing the book, because I gave enough indications in these tapes for the additional research to be done. And I also was going to try to get the tapes transcribed and use that as a basis for research later on. So I was doing these tapes, and I said, Leslie, no, I haven't had to use it. I left it over at Therese Place. And she said, oh. Well, the next day I saw Sal. And Sal said, hey, Phil, you know, Leslie's really hurt. She's so hurt because she had that flu, and she went out in the rain, and she bought you that typewriter, and you took it over and left it at Therese Place. And, you know, we all know that Therese never locks her door. She's had stuff stolen from in there. He said, you know, if that typewriter gets stolen there, I'll bet you Leslie's not going to finance us anymore, or finance you. And at that point, I didn't have the money yet to get over to London. So I thought to myself, God, I better go get that typewriter. So I went over to Therese Place, went in, got the typewriter, took it over to the secret place where I was living. And I finished the tapes about four more days, and I had finished the tapes. I finished the tapes on a Saturday afternoon, about 4:30 or 5, and I walked out and went to a store, bought a bottle of beer, and was walking back in to the place where I was living with Catherine, up the steps and down the hallway. This was a very old building which had been built as the servants' quarters for a very elegant building next door, and it was a tiny room. I walked down this dark hallway. There, standing in front of the door to Catherine's room, was this couple. And they were standing right next to the door, looking as if they just knocked and were waiting for the door to be opened. But as I walked up to the door, too, they backed off and began to hug, went into a clinch and began to kiss and to embrace. I thought that was kind of funny. And so I knocked on the door, and Catherine came to the door and opened it, and I stepped in, and right then and there I realized that I'd been had, that they discovered where I was living. The reason was this. The room was very near ORTF, which is like Radio City in Paris, and we'd been getting a lot of interference on the radio all the time. When I wasn't recording, we were listening to the radio a lot. It had this AM/FM long-wave band, you know, the table models, with the cassette recorder. So we listened to it, and we get all this interference, but we thought it was just because we were so close to the radio center. But for the last few days, we had been getting this beeping sound on our own radio, and it would go beep, 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 like that, and it was really an irritant. It was almost a subconscious thing. But standing out into the hallway, waiting for the door to open, I was hearing that beeping sound again. I said to myself, my God, is it so strong now that it's coming all the way out into the hallway? When Catherine opened the door and I stepped inside, I saw the radio was off. So I knew that that beeping sound was coming from those people who were monitoring the transmission. Catherine started to laugh when she saw them embracing, and I said, I just walked in and said, wait, I think they may be monitors. She said, yeah, the guy's got a hearing aid in his ear. I said, yeah, they've got these big things under their coats, too, which are probably receivers of some kind. So I was pretty sure that there was some kind of directional thing in this typewriter. And I really panicked, and I said, Catherine, go follow them and see where they're going. So she followed them, and this building is built on the banks of the Seine, with the main entrance up top and the service entrance at the bottom in the back. They forgot to go out the 4th or 5th level, which would take them out the regular entrance. They went all the way to the bottom, where you have to have a key to get out as well as to get in. They couldn't get out, and they eventually turned around, walked back up the stairs and out, and we never saw them. I went on off, and by that time I'd had the money from Leslie to get over to London. What they were trying to do, maybe, was to set me up for some kind of action there in Paris, where they might have been able to pull it off. But in England, I almost immediately, within 2 weeks, I had the contract from the Penguin Book Company, and since the CIA has this very intimate working relationship with the British service, I think it served in a way as a protection, because I don't think that the CIA, they must have made the decision that they didn't want to jeopardize everything they had going with the British by taking some kind of unilateral action against me, which wouldn't be approved by the British. And of course the British services didn't want a big scandal on their hands. They've got enough problems with Ireland and all of that. And they didn't want to have a scandal of the CIA doing something against an author of a British company. So there are a lot of factors involved in that, and there are other things that have happened. I got a lot of trouble in Spain when I went there last year. But why they actually haven't taken direct action is because they haven't been able to stop the book. And all this additional work that I'm doing, if they tried to do something, I think it would only be counterproductive for them, because they're on the defensive right now, and they're reeling under all of these scandals and revelations.